Did you hear the news? If you dive into the menu of Kentucky Route Zero TV Edition and select the multiplayer option, you'll be faced with this screen, telling you that this game's version of multiplayer is handing control over to a friend once you see something that reminds you of something. You're encouraged not to explain why or discuss it openly. It's an experience which, simply by describing it, defies its own explanation. Okay, wait, yes, the title of this video is kinda clickbaity, but would you have really clicked on it if I named it Why I Think Kentucky Route Zero's Opening Fails, but maybe that's just me, please don't be mad? This game is the first time in years that I've interacted with an award-winning, highly praised piece of art and just didn't get it. I understand what Kentucky Route Zero is trying to do, I understand what it's about, but I don't think it succeeds in the way it intends. Or at least, its opening doesn't. As a game, it's both banal and transparent, and also thoroughly impossible to talk about due to its complexity. And this leads me to your spoiler warning. Kentucky Route Zero is a messy game for someone to recommend, even if they love it or were inspired by it, because its purpose is to be an intensely insular experience, trying to make the player look within and connect with one of the game's particular avenues. For me, I didn't connect with the Americana, or Conway's personal journey, or the concentration on death and debt, despite thinking about both regularly. Seriously, I am in so much debt. I didn't connect with much of the game's weirdness, but it did make me consider Kentucky Route Zero's form, and how it borrows from my second favourite art form, theatre. And it's this question of form which I think the game fails in. If you've heard about it, or seen the trailers and thought, even for a second, that this weird little game might be right up your street, you owe it to yourself to check it out before watching this video. Because whilst I'll be walking through the opening of the game, I'll also be discussing its presentation as a whole, specifically a section in Act 3. So, full spoilers ahead, and this is the first 10 minutes. Did you hear the news? I'm sure you heard the news. Kentucky Route Zero's opening sets up two false expectations to the player. Our main character, Conway, sputters to a stop in front of the Eckes Oil's gas station. The minimalist, murky aesthetic with the colours that feel more like straight shades rather than textures immediately detaches the player from Conway himself. It's not the characters which are the stars of the show in Zero, it's the environments, and the lack of detail is purposeful in making the space of each scene feel abstract and separated from the player's own experience. This is gorgeous, sure, but as a result, I wasn't able to connect with any of the characters. Speaking to the creaky gas station attendant, Joseph, you're introduced to the game's core mechanic, reading and assigning responses for the player character. Joseph asks, "Did I hear a dog? What's your dog's name?" And you get the option to choose between two names for your rustic, furry companion, Homer or Blue. Once you make your choice, Conway's dog will carry that name for the rest of the story, which tutorializes to the player that their choices will have at least minor consequences to the game world, but this simply isn't true. Now, Kentucky Route Zero is such an abstract game that this was almost certainly the point. The player is presented with a somewhat meaningful choice at the beginning of the game, but it's still restricted to one of two options, neither of which provide any insight to Conway or the hound's previous owner, Ira. They're seemingly plucked from the game's foggy depths. It means that the player will expect to have some form of agency over the story, but they never do after this moment. meaning that when the player's control is ripped away from them for the dramatic end to Act 3, funneling Conway into a choice that you likely wouldn't make and damning him, the impact isn't as strong as the game thinks it is, because it has nothing to contrast off of. You're not shocked that the game has ripped a potential choice away from you because, outside of naming the hound, you don't have any meaningful say in the outcome of the story. It's all inevitable. And yes, this could be the point, but if the game is all about the inevitability of the end, what's the point in tutorializing choice and consequence to the player in the first 10 minutes? Conway is looking for the fateful Dogwood Drive, a location which Joseph doesn't recognise, but he highlights that perhaps his old computer has the answer, so we need to delve into the gas station's basement to turn the power back on. He hands us an item, a lamp, which is immediately equipped to Conway to navigate the darkness, and we delve underground. And this leads into the game's setup of the second false expectation. Without announcement, the game drops some ghosts onto the player's lap, playing a seemingly complicated board game. Despite all of your efforts, they can't hear Conway, so for the first and only time in the game, you can't read your way through a problem while pressing X. You actually need to use your wits and a little bit of problem solving to figure out the answer to an honest-to-God puzzle. The ghosts are looking for a missing dice, and are so busy arguing over who should go and look for it that it falls to you to follow standard point-and-click procedure. You need to find an item to unlock a pathway. If you're paying attention, you'll see that you need to use the item you have equipped, your lantern, to turn out the light because the dice glows in the dark, so you do so, pick it up, and bring it back to the ghosts who disappear without a trace. This is, for all intents and purposes, a puzzle. It requires the player to think, draw on knowledge that the game has provided, and use that knowledge to unblock an obstacle in the game world. It forces the player to use their game brain, and sets up the expectation that Kentucky Route Zero will be a point-and-click adventure but with a small twist. The twist, however, is that no puzzles like this will ever appear again. Even maneuvering through the Zero itself, with its bizarre instructions to go backwards to keep moving, are barely a puzzle in the traditional sense, because despite being such an abstract concept, it's not difficult to follow instructions that the game gives you. Zero's first 10 minutes comes to a close with Conway turning the power back on, returning to the surface and logging into a computer. Joseph tells the player that the password is, "Damn, I usually just feel it out. Muscle memory, you know? It's kinda long, kinda like a short poem, I think. One of those short poems that really sums it all up." Leaving the player to interpret this in one of two ways. One, the computer password doesn't matter, we can pick whatever we like. Or two, that we need to use that cryptic description to figure out what the right answer might be. Now, the player has been molded into believing that their dialogue choices matter because we named our dog, and this is just another puzzle to figure out because we just underwent a puzzle in the basement, so this game probably has puzzles, right? But neither of these are true, meaning the expectations which have been set up previously just lead to confusion when the options the computer presents to the player, random snippets of poetry, are all correct. Your choice does not matter. There are no puzzles. The opening ends with you leaving the gas station and hitting the open road, and eventually you're faced with this. Act 1, Scene 2. Because Kentucky Route Zero tries less to be a video game and more to be an interactive piece of theatre. Did you hear the news? I'm sure you heard the news. You didn't hear the news? The game's 5 episodes are titled Acts. The new landscapes and conversations are described as scenes. The dialogue which hovers above the characters looks like the words from a play, and the actions of those characters are described in detail like stage directions. Just before Act 3, there's an intermission where, for about 45 full minutes, the player is sucked out of Conway's story and drizzled into the body of an actor in a student theatre production of The Entertainment, a fictional play. This actor's role in the production is to play the barfly, a silent witness to the events of the story. If you like, you can turn your head around and listen to the director furiously writing a meta-commentary of the piece, and it's here that you'll see some words which speak for Kentucky Route Zero as a whole. The actors should have equal authority to write by acting into what Doolittle called the living script. Just like the player in Conway's story, the barfly acts like an invisible participant. The play will only continue if you cast your gaze at the actors who are next to speak, like they're waiting for you to sluggishly give them their cue, just like how Conway's tale only moves forwards if you take control of him and choose his next piece of dialogue. And as a piece of art, this is where Zero begins to feel like... God damn it, I'm just going to say it. It begins to feel like a student theatre production in its focus on bizarreness for bizarreness' sake. This isn't some David Lynchian construct where you can tell there's an undercurrent of sense in the strangeness. During my time playing it, I couldn't help but shake the feeling that Kentucky Route Zero's strangeness is often just there because of symbolism with a capital S. Can anybody tell me why Ezra's brother is a giant eagle? It's because America, isn't it? Why is The Entertainment just a play about events which have happened prior to Conway arriving in the gas station? Why is Junebug a robot? Why are there bears on this floor? Why? Why is bear? I'm not saying that Kentucky Route Zero is pretentious. I'm not saying that it's not my sort of thing, because it absolutely should be. A narrative-focused experience where the trick is to uncover its many secrets through personal analysis. This screams Twin Peaks magical realism, and I like Twin Peaks, so why didn't the game resonate with me when I hit the credits? Well, I think the answer lies in the game's experimentation with theatre as a form. I admire the effort. Zero asks, what if an audience collaborated with a performance? Looking back at the opening, you are director, scriptwriter, and actor immediately, inhabiting the characters and choosing when there's a lofty silence, or where in the set your character runs, if Conway speaks to his dog, which poem he inputs into the computer, his attitude to Joseph. But this is just like a lot of video games, right? So how does Zero distinguish itself from, say, a Telltale game? Well, unlike Wolf Among Us, for example, there are no puzzles, there's no item collection. The game purposefully frames each moment with scene cards and acts, but more than any of these, there are the stage directions. Did you hear the news? I'm sure you heard the news. You didn't hear the news? The news is, there is no news. In theatre, there are commonly three philosophies around writing stage directions. The first is there should be none at all. It's not the place of the playwright to dictate to a director how a scene should look. The second is that stage directions should be minimal, lacking emotional language. Conway picks up the bottle, and so on. And the third is more prescriptive, that stage directions should be written to be read just as much as acted out. Tennessee Williams, one of Zero's direct influences, was notorious for this third philosophy. Just look at how he describes the opening of A Streetcar Named Desire. The sky that shows around the dim white building is a peculiarly tender blue, almost a turquoise, which invests the scene with a kind of lyricism and gracefully attenuates the atmosphere of decay. For any budding directors out there, how would you invest a scene with a kind of lyricism? This is a gorgeous description in how the word choice evokes particular emotions from the reader, but for a director, this sort of poetry is almost insane to translate to the physical space of a stage. Now, let's compare this to one of Kentucky Route Zero's opening stage directions. Folding chairs are arranged around a worn card table. The chairs are empty, and the surface of the table is bare. This is a stage direction which pulls from philosophy too, directions which don't use emotional language, but because Kentucky Route Zero is so minimalist in its detail, with its blocky colours, it needs to be more Tennessee Williams than Samuel Beckett in order to provide an emotional core to the story. Again, the purpose clearly is to make the player fill in the emotional gaps themselves, to force us to think more about our own experiences rather than Conway's, but with every new weirdness which gets thrown the player's way, forcing them to acclimatise, and with Conway's team gathering more members at a rate too fast to give each one space to truly breathe, ending with a full town of people, I found that I stopped caring about Ezra or Johnny by the end. And this is almost certainly where Kentucky Route Zero failed for me. It's an interactive text rather than a piece of theatre you're collaborating on. Theatre is more than acts and scenes and stage directions. You don't breathe in Kentucky Route Zero like you would a production of A Streetcar Named Desire, because you're missing one of the most important components: the acting. There's no voice acting, no specific blocking. If the player is the actor controlling all of these individual characters, there's no thrill in the enunciation, in the body language we choose to make a scene comedic or tense, because the game doesn't simulate this. Like poetry, it's always more powerful when you hear it spoken aloud, and whilst it's not an objective criticism, the lack of actors makes Kentucky Route Zero less of a standard theatre piece and more of a visual novel. And it's not just the voice acting. The intention of Zero is to impress with a theatre production which you are fraternising with. But because your choices are relatively null, despite the expectations set by the game's opening, you're not participating in this piece of theatre. Not really. You're gazing upon it like an abstract painting, lacking in any meaningful influence and without the beauty of watching fellow human beings inhabit other bodies and souls. And that's okay. Some of the most fun I've had in video games was with visual novels, but why does Kentucky Route Zero pretend it's something it's not by parroting iconography of theatre as a form, rather than just committing to being a visual novel? Why are there acts? Why are there scenes? Why are there stage directions? Why is there a 45-minute meta play which directly addresses the form it's imitating? Kentucky Route Zero is an admirable experiment, and it's one which will work for some, and I'm seriously gutted that it didn't work for me. But I stand by that no matter how you feel about the game, its opening sputters in trying to establish a player's relationship with the story and the form. And if I'm being really contrarian about it, I would argue that if the story looked like this instead of this, it wouldn't be getting the praise that it is. I want to be wrong. I want to have someone else's experience with this game. So, for the first time ever, I'm going to make a request. Please, prove me wrong. Make this video null and void. Someone, please, explain to me what I'm missing here. What have I overlooked? Did you hear the news? I'm sure you heard the news. You didn't hear the news? The news is, there is no news. What is the news? Thanks for hearing me out on this one. I meant what I said. I'd kill to have some comments below explaining how my reading of this one was wrong. Wrong, not different. Because I'd rather be wrong than have to live with the knowledge that I've missed out on something great here. If you liked what you saw, why not check out my analysis of the first 10 minutes of Undertale? Like, comment and subscribe, and as always, take care.